Hello friends, in this lecture, we're gonna learn about the vector data types. Okay, so now that we understand the most basic data types, which are booleans, floats, and integers, let's learn about vectors, which is another very important data type that we need to learn. A vector is simply a data structure that can hold multiple floating point values. So let me create one of these and then I can start explaining it. So let's create a couple new lines here, and then we're gonna say vec2, which is the keyword that we need to use to create a vector. And then we're gonna give it a name, so let's say my vector. So this is how you create one. Vec2 is one of three types of vectors we can create. Vec2 can hold two floating point values. Vec3 can hold 3, and Vec4 can hold 4. So very straightforward. This is how we declare it, but to create one, we're gonna have to use a vector constructor. So whichever type you're trying to create, in this case a vec4, you're going to type it out and then you're going to use it like a function, basically. This is going to take in 4 floating point numbers because we're trying to create a vec4. So let's give it 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then it's going to create a vector 4 and assign it to our variable here. Let me also show you how to get these values outside of the vector. So how to use the vector basically. To do that, we're going to say my vector, and to get the first value, in this case 1, we can do dot x. To get the second one, we can do dot y, and to get the third one, we can do dot z. And for the final one, we can do dot w. As you can, tell, x is going to return 1, y is going to return 2, z here is going to return 3, and w is going to return 4. So this is how to create a vector and how to get the values from the vector. Okay, this is the most basic stuff. Let me show you how to, do some interesting stuff with the vector constructor here. In the shading language, the vector constructor is very flexible. It lets you do, very crazy things actually. So for example, let's say that I have a vec2 up here called my vec2. And I'm going to create this as 6 and 5. What I can do is I can take this vec2, take its name, and I can put this inside of vec4's constructor. And this is completely legal. What's happening is we're using the first two numbers we provided here for x and y, and then for z and w, we're using 6 and 5 from my vec2. We can also create a vector on the fly inside of the constructor here. So instead of 1 and 2, I can say vec2, 3 and 4, for example. In this case, x is going to be 3 and y is going to be 4. You can take this idea and stretch it as far as you can. You can just provide a single vec3 with 3 values and then at the end provide one of your own. You can even put a vec4 inside of it probably and it would still work. Like I said, very flexible and very awesome. There's also another way we can construct a vector, which is kind of like a shortcut. So let's create a vec3 here because we already have a vec2 and a vec4. This is the last one we don't have, and let's call this my vec3. Normally I would do something like 1, 2, 3 to initialize this. But let's say that I want to have the same number for all 3 numbers in this vector. So I want to have something like this. I want to have 1 for all 3 values of this vector 3. Obviously it doesn't have w because it's a vec3, not a vec4. To do this, I can simply omit all of them and just leave 1 here. And the shading language understands that I want to use 1 for all, numbers inside of this vector. This can also be a vec4, for example. I can switch it and it will still work. Obviously, I need to change the type here. It could also be a vec2. Well, here it's not working because we already have vec2 as a variable up there, so I'm just gonna delete that and now it's going to work. Okay, so those are the different ways we can construct a vector. I'm also going to show you how to get values from a vector in a different way. So we have this vec4 here. So instead of using x here, we can say my vector dot r, and that's also going to return the first element. Then we can say g, b, and a, and these are all the same. G is going to return the second element, B the third, and A the fourth. So why is this? Why did they create a different way of accessing the members? Very simple. If you didn't know, in a computer, colors are represented with red, green, blue, and alpha. And very often when you're programming shaders, you're going to be working with colors. And it really helps if you can just think in colors sometimes. And this helps you do that. Instead of using x, y, z, and w, and just think of vectors as a mathematical construct, you can start thinking of them as red, blue, green, and alpha channels. So that's the reason they did that. Okay, so these are vectors. One final thing that I'm going to teach, and that is we have two different types of vectors. So we only covered the vec 2, 3, 4. We also have an I-vec 3, 2, and 4. And the I-vec holds integers instead of floating point values. And we also have a B-vec 2, 3, 4, and the B-vecs hold booleans. These work exactly the same way, so I'm not gonna demonstrate them. Just know that they're available. I usually just use normal vectors. You'll probably do the same, but just letting you know that they exist. Okay, so we're gonna cut it there for this lecture. In this one, we learned about vectors. We learned how to declare vector variables, how to construct them normally and then in weird ways. And finally, we learned how to get the values outside of a vector in two different ways.